Hello everybody, my name's Gethyn Ellis. Welcome to my session for Tenerife Winter Sessions 2026. The session's called Data-Driven Storytelling with Power BI. Now, the key idea I want to set up right from the start is this. Today's session is not about Power BI features, and it's not about how clever your DAX is. It's about why so many dashboards fail to drive decisions, even when the data is correct. Most organisations I work with, they already have dashboards. They're not short of reports. What they're short of is clarity and confidence and action. So over the course of this session, we're going to talk about how we can turn Power BI from a reporting tool into a decision-making tool by applying storytelling principles that actually work with how people think. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts, let me just say a big thank you to the sponsors, and thank you for everybody who has put this event together, and thank you for accepting my session and having me on. These events don't happen without sponsors, so a big shout out to those, and go and visit their website and show them some support if you're attending this session today. And then I'll give you a little bit of information about me as well. All right, so I've been working with the Microsoft Data Platform and SQL Server and the Microsoft Data Platform for the best part of 25 years. I've had a variety of different jobs in that time, from report writer to web developer to DBA. For the past 20 years, or approaching 20 years, I've been running a small consulting and training business called GethynEllis.com. And we offer a range of different services. So we do things like data platform architecture and design. We do analytics. We have an analytics accelerator. We offer analytics as a service. We also do database administration and managed service for the data platform. If you want to get in touch with me, you can see my email address on the slide here. I'll just drop a little highlight over that so you can pick it out if you need it. There he is there. All right, Gethyn at GethynEllis.com. I do still have Twitter on my profile, but I don't really use that anymore. So if you are on socials and you want to connect, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. Now, if you do have any questions on today's session, do feel free to send me an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll happily answer your questions. Now, I like to turn my sessions into a bit of a story anyway, so it's going to follow a story theme. But I'm going to focus the sort of the data used in this session is going to be based off Fantasy Premier League data, and that's English Premier League data, and how I go about analysing it, how I go about using it to make decisions. And I'm going to show you how a report I designed for me works fine for me, but it doesn't translate very well to a wider audience, and why I need to change my approach in presenting the data to allow people to take action on the data to build better teams for themselves. Okay, so I don't want this to sound controversial, but it might sound a little bit controversial. Dashboards on their own don't drive decisions. There we go, I've said it. Right? Because if they did, organisations would be operating perfectly by now. Right? Organisations already have lots of dashboards. What I see repeatedly is leadership teams sitting in front of dashboards, nodding along, oh yeah, that looks good, asking questions, and then nothing changes. The data's there, the charts are there, the decisions don't happen. And that's because dashboards often present information, they don't present understanding. They assume that the audience is going to join the dots themselves. And in a busy organisation with overworked leadership teams and people stressed, the dot joining really happens. So why does this keep happening? Right. I guess the root of the problem is we often confuse information with insight. We've become very good at collecting data. We've actually become very good at visualizing data. But being good at those two things doesn't automatically mean we're good at explaining what the data means. So when a report says, here's all the numbers, the burden of interpretation is then pushed to the audience. And if your audience is tired, distracted, stressed, not close to the data, used to making their own gut feel decisions, that interpretation simply doesn't happen. Right, now, that's not a tools problem. Right, that's probably more of a design and communication problem. Now, I think that before you start out on this journey, it's really important to ground the problem you're solving in reality. Okay, the reality of data overload in this case, right, is very much a real thing. Data growth hasn't just been incremental, it's been exponential. Right? And we often talk about volume and velocity and variety. But what that really translates to is cognitive overload. People are expected to absorb more information. They're expected to absorb more information faster and from a far greater number of sources than ever before. And this is exactly why analytics exists in the first place. Not to show everything, but to help us cope with that complexity. And storytelling, it can become the bridge. It can bridge the gap, right, between overwhelming data and meaningful insight. Right, so I want to try and reframe analytics as a making sense activity, not a reporting activity. Right, so this is really what analytics is really for. At its core, analytics isn't about dashboards or tools. It's about making sense. Right, it's intended to help us sift through noise, spot patterns, solve problems, and identify opportunities. But none of that happens automatically just because a report exists. If analytics doesn't reduce confusion, it hasn't really done its job. And storytelling is how we turn analysis into something the business can actually use. Now, we want to move from data to insight. What you can see in the background of this slide is a report that I use for analysing FPL data. And I'll show you this report later on when we get to the demo section. Right, and if you look at this now, it might not mean an awful lot of sense to you. It makes sense to me because I've written this for me and I understand what I've done. But if I want to use this as a communication aid to make other people take decisions based off this data, it probably doesn't do a very good job. And that leads me to perhaps a simple but important truth. Numbers like this, they don't speak for themselves. A bar chart doesn't explain why something happened. A KPI doesn't explain what should happen next. Insights only exist when the meaning is clear, when context is provided, and when the audience understands why they should care. And that's the role of storytelling and the role it plays in Power BI. Right, we want to move from various amounts of data that you can see on the screen here to something that leads to insight. Right, we really want to sort of establish a shared definition of how things work, right, before we get into the nuts and bolts of things. Right, so this is where data-driven storytelling comes in. So what is data-driven storytelling? Data storytelling isn't about making things pretty or adding narrative fluff. It's about combining three things. Right? It's about combining meaning. What does this data actually tell us? It's about context. Why does this matter now? It's about direction. What should we do next? If these three elements are present, right, people don't just understand the report, they trust it. Now, to put this into the context of being a fantasy Premier League manager, right, the question on everyone's mind every week, the most important question you can answer in Fantasy Premier League is, which player should I captain next week? That's it. That's week in, week out. That's probably the biggest decision you can make as a Fantasy Premier League manager. Right, now this is, when I show you the demo later, you'll see this slide again. Right, but comparing the slide in the background here, we've got lots of data and lots of numbers, to this. Right, this one definitely doesn't necessarily have meaning or context or direction. This, right, what does this data actually tell us? What transfer should I make this week? Who should my captain be? There is the answer. Right, why does it matter now? Because the deadline is fast approaching at the time of recording. Okay, and what should we do next? Well, we need to use our transfers this week to make sure we've got Bruno Fernandes in the team, and he might be someone who we want to consider making captain. When those three elements are present, people are not just understanding this report, they're going to trust it. And I guarantee if you were watching this before the deadline this week, you'd have gone out and picked Bruno Fernandes, transferred him in and made him your captain, because you're going to trust it. Now, I'm going to try and introduce a sort of simple storytelling, or a simple story structure, I should say, right? And we can try and do that without the jargon. So, every good story, you think of any good story you've ever heard before, if it's a book, if it's a film, if it's a presentation, it has a structure. And the structure will be something like this. It will have a beginning, it will have, right, in the beginning, the scene gets set. In the middle, it'll have a middle. It will explore the challenge, and it'll have an end where we move towards a resolution. It'll also have a hero. And Power BI reports are going to work in the same way. So instead of random pages of visuals, we should be deliberately guiding the audience through that journey. Now, every story has a hero, right? And I've tried to frame this as being the hero's journey with a business version. Now, in storytelling terms, the most important thing to get right is this. Your audience is the hero. Right? They're the one facing the difficult challenge. They're facing the business challenge that needs to be overcome. They're the ones who are under pressure. Right, under pressure to make decisions, to make those decisions well and to get those decisions right. The audience are the ones who are going to succeed or fail. When reports are designed around showing off the data, like the left-hand side here, they fail. Here's the data. Join all the dots yourself. Make your own decisions. It's good. It's why reports don't get used. Right? When they're designed around helping the hero, right, and helping the hero overcome their uncertainty and overcome their challenge, they are much more likely to succeed. Now, if you're a report author or a report developer, or you're working in this space, right, you need to understand that your role is that of the guide. You are not the hero. And I'm not saying you're all making the reports all about you before. I'm just saying if you instantly realize your role is to be the guide in the story, think let's use Shrek as an example, right? You are not the ogre in Shrek, right? You are Donkey. Okay. What other examples do we have? Or you're not Ralph in Wreck-It Ralph. You are Vanellope Von Sweet, or Princess Vanellope. Right? Your role is to guide. Right? So, as a report author, as an analyst, as a Power BI developer, we are not the hero. Our role is the guide in the story. We provide clarity. We remove confusion. We show the safest path from uncertainty to decision. When you design a report with that mindset, everything changes, from the visuals you choose to the order that you present them in. Now, it's important we anchor perhaps storytelling to decision making. Right? That's the key bit. It's not about exploration, it's about making decisions. So we need to start with a real question. Before you open up Power BI, before you choose a single visual, before you write a single DAX measure, there's one question that matters more than anything else. And the question is this: what decision is the report meant to support, and what question is that report meant to answer? Most reports, they start with, what data do we have? Okay, and there is no clear path to a decision when we're just presenting data. Story-driven reports start with, what decision is currently blocked? Can you see that? We're instantly looking at solving a problem, not looking to see what we've got. We're not exploring, we're problem solving. And if you can't clearly articulate the decision, the report is always almost going to drift into being informational rather than actionable. Right? An informational reports are where good intentions go to die. So I guess the purpose of this slide, we're talking about identifying our audience, and the key takeaway from this is just understand often one report will really fit everybody's needs. And the key here is identifying your audience. Once you know what decision is being made, the next question is who is making it? Is it executives, managers, analysts, operational teams? They all think differently and they all care about different things. Now, we often try to serve all of the same people with the same report. Going down the storytelling route actually forces you to be explicit. You design for someone, you don't design for everyone. And then when the audience is clear, choices become easier. What to include, what to remove, and what to emphasize. Right, so we need to identify our audience and understand that rarely does one report fit all. And we need to define the business problem. Right? A strong story starts with a clear problem. Right? It's not a vague objective. It's not a collection of KPIs. It's a real business problem. What's going wrong? What's the risk? Why does it matter now? And if the problem isn't obvious within the first few seconds of viewing a report, the audience will mentally disengage from it, even if they keep looking at the screen. So using FPL as an example, with the report that I showed you pages and pages of data, then I showed you who you should captain this week. Now when you look at that page, it's immediately obvious, hopefully, what problem that is answering, right? And what problem the consumers of that report might have. Now, when you're going through this process, psychology is a big thing, and understanding how the brain processes information is going to be important. So this is where psychology starts to matter. A human short-term memory, our short-term memory, where we actually process information, can hold about 3 to 5 things at once. Right? Anything beyond that, it starts to get dropped or ignored. Now, this means dashboards that show 10 charts at once, they're effectively, in effect, they're asking the impossible. The brain simply can't process it all meaningfully at the same time. Now, why do these dashboards overload us? Most dashboards, they fail not because the data's wrong. It's because they overload that short-term memory. Too many visuals, right, competing for too much attention. Too many colours, right, implying importance. Too many numbers, right, ask the audience to decide what matters. When everything is important, nothing is important. So storytelling is about being kind to the brain, helping it focus on what matters most. Now, using that as an example and tying the Fantasy Premier League back, I have another talk that I deliver. It's called Moneyball, Building a Killer Fantasy Football Team. And I talk about the Oakland A's and the true story around how they use data and analytics to build a championship baseball team, and in that they managed to boil down who they were going to sign as players. They were going to basically melt that down to one number. Do they get on base, and what is the percentage they get on base? And if they get on base more than 33% of the time, they can play. And that allowed them to sign what other teams thought were a bunch of misfits that then they turned into a championship winning side. So, grouping creates meaning. Right? One of the simplest and most powerful techniques we have is grouping. If we can group related information together, we can reduce that cognitive load. So instead of 10 separate data points, the brain sees 2 or 3 meaningful chunks. And this is how we can bring complexity down to something that's manageable. Not by removing data, but by organising it with intent. Okay, as you can see by the slide here, that the ungrouped data versus the group data, it creates meaning. Now, how people perceive order, right? Humans are wired to look for patterns and look for order automatically. So when elements are close together, we assume they're related. Right? When they look similar, we group them mentally. When they're aligned, we follow them visually. Good report design works with those instincts instead of fighting them. Right, so what I'm really presenting here are the sort of is something called the Gestalt principles, but I've just removed the jargon a little bit. People look for order automatically. They look for proximity, similarity, alignment, and continuity. Now we can apply this to Power BI. Right, so we want to design for perception, not decoration. We want to group related visuals. We want to use spacing intentionally. We want to align elements to guide the eye. So in Power BI, this means being deliberate about the layout. Spacing is not empty, it's communication. Alignment guides the eye. Consistency reduces mental effort. When the reports are designed well, the audience doesn't have to think about how to read them. They can focus entirely on what they're learning. And we need to choose the right visual. Perhaps one of the most common mistakes is choosing visuals based on preference or habit. Instead, every visual should earn its place by answering a specific question. Right, what comparison am I asking the audience to make? What pattern do I want them to notice? What decision do I want this to support? If the visual doesn't move the story forward, it's probably just decoration. That means it can go in the bin. Now, the visuals that tell stories, right? Strong visuals are not just displaying data, they communicate the insight. Right? They have clear, meaningful titles. They focus attention on what matters. Right? They reduce the need for explanation. If you need to explain verbally what a chart is showing, then that's perhaps a sign or a signal the story isn't quite there yet. Now we move into sort of structuring the report, all right? And we'll start at the beginning. Remember the old structure of a story, beginning, middle and end. Every good story starts by setting the scene, and reports are no different. Now, the beginning of a Power BI report should answer 3 simple questions for the audience. What are we looking at? Why does this matter? What's changed or triggered this conversation? Right, and this isn't necessarily the place for deep analysis. It's about context. You're orientating the audience so they understand why they're here before asking them to think harder. When this is missing, people jump straight to the details without understanding the bigger picture, and that's where the confusion starts. All right, so let me just flick back one. All right, we need to set the scene. We need to answer the questions. What are we looking at? Why does this matter? What's changed or triggered this conversation? Right. This is the beginning of our report. And then we move on to the middle. Right. So in our report structure, we've got the middle. And the middle of the story is where the exploration and the explanations live. Now, this might be where you unpack what's driving the outcome. Right. What factors influence the result? Where are the patterns or trends? What's surprising or unexpected? Right? And crucially, this should still feel guided. You're not dumping analysis on the audience. You're walking them through it in a step-by-step way, helping them build and understand rather than forcing them to discover it alone. And then we have the final part of our story, the end. Right? Now, this is the part many reports forget. Right? The end. The end of the report should clearly answer the so what question. What decision should be made next? What happens next? If a report ends with, and here's the data, the story's unfinished. Right? A strong ending, it will reduce ambiguity and it'll give people confidence to act. Even if that action is, we need to investigate further. Right? The direction should be explicit. Okay, so we're going to move from a dashboard to a decision tool. That's ultimately what we're aiming for. So when you pull all of this together, right, the shift is subtle, but it's very powerful. You move from building dashboards to building and designing decision tools. You go from displaying metrics to creating meaning. You come from reporting what happened to guiding what should happen next. The data might be the same, the outcome is completely different. And this is where Power BI can really start to deliver value. Now we'll jump onto and have a look at a demo in just a second, but let's just talk about what this might look like in practice. Right? In practice, this doesn't mean more complex reports. Probably, in fact, quite the opposite. You might end up with fewer visuals and clearer messages and stronger titles and more intentional layouts. The audience spends less time trying to work out what they're looking at and more time discussing what to do about it, which is exactly where you want them. So we're going to head on over to the demo machine now, where we're going to look at or compare a report that was designed to be consumed by me, where I guess I'm the hero and the report author, so I'm both the guide and the hero, and then compare one where I've produced a report that's presenting the same data but with the intended audience of Fantasy Premier League managers who need to know who to captain this week, what transfers to make, and how to be successful this game week in getting the best points possible. Right, now, this in of itself is okay. It's not a busy screen. It's got one visual on it. It's got it's a scatter plot. Right? And if I highlight over it here in Power BI, you will see that it has, on the x-axis, it's got form, so how many points they've scored over the last month. And then on the y-axis, it's got the sum of expected goals, right? Really interesting. For me, I know what this looks like, but I'm having to present this to you for it to make sense. Erling Haaland here, his form is he's only scoring just under 4 points a game. He's been on a bit of a goal-scoring drought. His cost is very expensive. His sum of expected goals, though, is very high. He scored a lot of goals. Right, if we come down this way to the right-hand side, we got Thiago of Brentford. His form is high. His form is 7 points per game over the last month. Sum of expected goals is 14, and he's very, very cheap. Right, then we can come down here to, this is Florian Wirtz, who hasn't scored a lot of goals, but his form is high. His expected goals is almost 5, and his sum is 8.35. So this visual is okay. It's not telling us an awful lot. The title's bad. But I know what it is, and I use this for my own picking, right? So then I'm going to look at, this is going to look at player cost versus points comparison. You might get a little bit confused between the two here, but what we have on the right-hand side is the sum of total points. So this is the sum of points that a player has accumulated from the start of the season. We're now into February, so clearly some of these points would have been gained many, many months ago. Up here in the top right-hand corner, all right, we've got the most expensive players. This is going to be Erling Haaland, and he is, somewhere in the £15 million range. This line here is the 95th percentile line. All right, so I try and make it a policy to only pick players above this line, and the further this way they are, so if they're above this line and as far to the left as possible, I would like to pick. So these players here, these are going to be my friends because they're cheap and they're scoring lots of points. Now, again, really good information, but I needed to use my voice and my presentation skills to show you that, right? So Semenyo, for example, at Man City is playing very, very well. He probably should be in my team. This is Bruno Fernandes. You'll talk about Bruno in just a second, but Bruno this week probably should be a captain, probably should be in your team based on his estimated point score. Then we've got Gabriel, the defender at Arsenal, playing very well. Quite expensive, but he scores a lot of goals. His form is high. Just behind him there we have... Oh, sorry, there's a couple in there. So there's Bruno Guimaraes at Newcastle. There's a few others floating about. Morgan Rogers at Villa. Mukeli, I don't know if I said that right, so apologies to this player, but he's obviously scored a lot of points and he's in a lot of form. I'll have to look him up because he is very, very cheap at £4.5 million. I'm going to assume he's a defender, but he there is looking very, very good. Right, now I use this and I'm explaining this and it's okay, right, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Then I'm moving over to like, oh, here we go, next page, one visual. I'm looking at this is actually looking at the club points league table, right? So Man City are top. They've got the biggest number of FPL points. This doesn't translate to league points, but it's roughly correlated because Man City are second and Arsenal are top and Chelsea are third and Liverpool, I think, a fifth. I believe a fifth. Man United a fourth. Don't know where Everton are because Everton are rubbish. But this is reasonably active, although Aston Villa here is interesting. In the total points for FPL, they're sort of mid-table when I think they are actually third in the league. Bottom three. The bottom three is the bottom three, right? And the exception of West Ham and Burnley swapping positions on this FPL points list. Wolves are bottom. Then it's Wolves are bottom in the league. Then it's Burnley. Then it's West Ham. Then it's Forest. So it's all quite reflective of the actual table. But again, looking at this, there's no title. It doesn't tell you anything. Right, we can move on to expected goals. Again, lots and lots of information. What is this telling me? Is this answering a question? Is this telling me a story? No, it's not. It's just presenting information. Now, I wrote this for me, so I didn't need that. I wanted to know, okay, expected goals, who's top of that list? João Pedro at the moment for forwards. So we've got a little few slices on here. I've got João Pedro for forwards. If you look at midfielders, expected goals, there's Bruno Fernandes. Keep him in your thoughts. Defenders, there's Gabriel. Goalkeepers, there's Kelleher at Brentford, and then Raya at Arsenal, and Pickford at Everton, and so on and so forth. Right, now I'm not going to go through all of these, but there is some interesting things in here. Right, there's a lot of tabular data. Right, and there's some stuff on biggest misses, and we got some. This is kind of the difference between the sum of expected goals and the goals you've actually scored. So Mateta, who was angling for a move earlier this week to an Italian side. He's actually the biggest misser in the Premier League this season. He should have scored somewhere in the region of 12, but he's actually scored 8. Liam Delap at Chelsea should have scored 3 or 4, and he's scored 1. Jorgen Strand Larsen, now of Crystal Palace. There's a theme emerging here, but he was playing for Wolves. He didn't try hard enough, in truth. But Wolves sold him in the window It always looked like he wasn't trying very hard at all. He scored 1 goal, should have scored 4, so on and so forth. Well, biggest miss, but it's not telling us anything. So applying those storytelling principles to this that I've spoken about throughout, right, I've got a couple of pages here that I could present in a better way, but I've got a beginning and I've got a middle and an end. So let's set the scene with our beginning. What business problem am I trying to solve? Is, well, in fantasy Premier League terms, what I'm really trying to solve is who should I transfer in this week and who do I want to captain? And this week, unequivocally, the person you need to transfer in based off this figure here, which is the sum of estimated points. Bruno is estimated to get 8 points this game week. That makes him the highest estimated point scorer. He's averaging 5.46 points a game. His form is high at 6.4, and he's scored 133 points already. So we've set the scene. Who am I going to captain? Well, perhaps I should captain Bruno. Perhaps I've already got Bruno. Perhaps I need to make a different decision. Is there anything else I should consider? Well, proximity here means what it means, right? They're all close together. There's a relationship between them. Right, well, perhaps I need a goalkeeper. Well, Kelleher and Sells, right, in terms of form. Right, what top players are on form this week? This is different from estimated points. This is looking at their past performances over the last several game weeks. So Kelleher or Sells on form would be your goalkeepers. Right, the cost at 9.2 million. So might be worth a punt. Then we've got Gabriel. I don't know how to say that name. I think it's Theo, but I don't know who that is. I don't know that player off the top of my head. Nathan Collins, Mukalele, and then Dorgu. I'm not actually sure if Dorgu is, its estimated points is 0. I actually think he's injured. So you don't want to be picking him this week. Right? And perhaps that's a error in here. But on form, because he has been playing recently, he's in the top X, but he's unavailable this week, so he's not going to be playing. Right, for defenders. Then midfielders in terms of form, we've got Wirtz at Liverpool, we've got Enzo Fernandez at Chelsea, right, with reasonable estimated points. We've got Morgan Gibbs-White over at Forest. We got Cunha at Manchester United, estimated to do very well. And then striking-wise, we have got actually Jared Bowen is. Let's just do that. We've got Thiago at Brentford. We've got Joe Pedro at Chelsea. There's Brian Brobby. He's a new person on me. My estimated points is 4 and Jared Bowen 6. So there's a few forwards in there that are doing pretty well. So we know we probably need to bring in Bruno. We know we've got till Friday to make a decision on the rest of our squad, and we might not want to change this dramatically, but we've got a good idea of who's going to do very well. And then if I come down to the bottom here, we've got a little bit of a commentary, right, based on estimated points and form. It gives us a list of players who it thinks we should pick. But this then takes us to the end. Now, what I'm using on this particular field is creating this narrative currently, right, with a game week deadline coming up. If you're looking to make changes to your FPL team this week, consider this. Right, top 2 goalkeepers by form is Kelleher and Sells. Top 5 defenders by form is Gabriel, Dorgu, I think it's Thiago, Collins, and Mukalele. Midfielders are Wirtz, Fernandez, Gibbs-White, Aria, and Cunha. And the forwards are Thiago, Joe Pedro, and Brian Brobby. Now, he is a new one on me, and I will be looking to bring him in this week. But as you can see, that takes the reader. If I was just presenting these pages, it hides all the detail of my model, because nobody really cares about the model. They want to know answers to the question, as an FPL manager, who do I want to bring in this week? I've told you who to captain. I've told you what your squad should look like. I've told you everything you need to know. If you've got confidence in that data, you will then make those decisions and take decisive action. And whilst it's not necessarily a complete answer, it gives enough confidence for people to make a decision and move on with their day. So if there's a few things to take away from today, it's kind of this, right? Start with the decision, not the data. Design your reports for how people think, not how the tool works. Structure your reports like stories. Have a beginning, a middle and an end. And remember, your job is to guide, not to impress. And if you get those right, your reports will naturally become more impactful. So I think the challenge I'll set you as I'm going to leave you today is this. Right? It's a simple challenge that you can take away with you. Think about the last report you built. Compare my FPL report to the story-driven report I've also incorporated into it. Who was the hero? Right? In my initial report, it was me. I was writing for me, and that might be okay. But in the second part, with the beginning, the middle, and the end, it was actually an audience who I'm trying to show how they should pick their fantasy Premier League team this week. What was the story? Well, you're trying to predict a set of scores, in my case, with a lot of variables in play, and you want to find as much consistency as you can. What action did you lead to? You went and captained Bruno Fernandes. Right? If your report has got those actions, then you're doing well. And if you're struggling to answer those questions, that's not a failure. It's just an opportunity to redesign your report with intent. Right, so I'll leave you with the same idea as I started with. Dashboards don't drive decisions, stories do. And if you combine Power BI with storytelling, you're not just going to show data. You're going to create clarity, confidence, and action. Thank you for watching my session. It's been a pleasure recording this for you. My name's Gethyn Ellis. Look me up on LinkedIn, look up my YouTube channel, etc., etc. Any questions, please do reach out. Thanks.